There is one question that I've seen make an appearance at every gathering of cyber leaders that I've ever attended. Every conference, every meeting. Anytime that more than 3 CISOs are in the room, this question shows up. And the question is, who should the CISO report to? The question is so popular it almost becomes cliche. And yet, collectively, we keep asking it. We keep asking because CISOs have to orient their approaches and strategies to the answer to this question. It's a very relevant question, and it's one that's vital to understanding what a CISO is and what a CISO should be.
Assemble the council.
There's a strong notion in our community and in the greater cybersecurity landscape at large that CISOs need to do more and be more. As cybersecurity evolves around and alongside business and technology trends like privacy, social media, encryption, compliance, the role of the CISO must adapt too. Security itself is becoming commoditized and automated. The demands on CISOs are growing, sometimes daily. Regulation and compliance are also increasingly impacting the office of the CISO, shifting due diligence from what did you know and when did you know it, to new standards that are closer to what should you have known and when did you respond. This brings us back to our key question, who should the CISO report to? And we want to have a discussion about optimizing the CISO's reporting structure. Good news for us, we've brought in some experts to help us tackle this issue. Today's special guests are prominent figures in the cyber community. They have both spent significant time at the pinnacle of the CISO realm. I've been on my own journey climbing up the CISO mountain. Like many CISOs that are out there, I am following the trail that they have pioneered. Heather Hinton, 3 cheers for Heather. Heather has been a CISO at PagerDuty, RingCentral, and IBM. She has also been a distinguished engineer at IBM. She is adjunct faculty at the Harvard Extension School, part of Harvard University. She's active as a cybersecurity advisor, helping with startups and giving companies strategic guidance. The bottom line is, when Heather speaks, you would be very wise to listen. So to Heather, please say hello to our audience and tell us who you've reported to as a CISO.
So I have, just as a disclaimer, always been on the technology side of the house. And so my reporting has been chief product officer, chief technology officer, and then in a couple of cases, general managers. And that's in companies that are large enough that a general manager is the equivalent of a CEO. I think that the most impactful reporting relationships are those where it's a partnership between me and my reporting stakeholder. They value security. They are going to work with me to make sure that what we are doing from a security point of view meets that balance between security requirements and business requirements, which always requires a lot of debate and trade-off. And having a positive, constructive working relationship is critical to being successful in that space. It's not clear to me that we're necessarily asking the right question in terms of who you report to, because who you report to, ultimately for a CISO, that's the person that determines your annual rating, your bonus, right? Those, for lack of a better way to talk about it, your HR structures, right? But one of the things that I predict we will surface as we go through all of the rest of the conversation is that it is critical that you have strong stakeholder relationships with everybody, regardless of who you report to. And I predict that what we will end up saying is it wouldn't be nice if we essentially partnered. And so and maybe the closest thing is to say dotted line, but we need to partner with everybody, with the CFO, the chief revenue officer, the head of sales, the head of legal, the head of engineering, the head of, procurement, contracts, legal, blah, everybody, right? We are unique in the scope that we have to partner with literally everybody. And that's, I think, partly why we are having these conversations on who you report to, because we haven't done a good enough job of separating out reporting to from partnering with.
Excellent, Heather. Thank you. And now we're taking a look at Manju Mude. 3 cheers for Manju. Manju has been a CISO at Opportune and Splunk. She has served as a security leader at both Yahoo and Apple. She's been a cybersecurity practitioner at RSA, Ernst & Young, Bank of America, and in government. Manju also has considerable experience in large breach recovery. So Manju, let's stop right there. Some people are heroes. You, my friend, are a superhero. Please say hi to our audience. Tell us who you have reported to as a CISO and give us some positives.
Thank you so much, Scott. I'm so excited to be here. You are correct. I had the privilege of working on some very large breaches in my career. And it's really taught me a lot on how to handle security and why we do it. We go through our career making it all the way potentially to CISO or security leader. And it's so important to understand the why and how the adversaries are working. And working on some large breaches has really taught me that. In my career, I've reported to almost all the C's. I've also reported to CIO, CFO, dotted line to general counsel, direct line to general counsel, and CTOs. My most positive reporting relationship was to general counsel legal on both accounts, and it just worked really, really well. I also really enjoyed reporting to the CFO. That happened early in my tenure as a CISO, and it really taught me a lot about budgeting and the risk management side, the financial risk management side of being a security leader. I will say that there was some unique reporting relationships. I agree with Heather, though, really having the most aligned goals, regardless of who you report to, is important. For me, I found that having risk speak, if my leader understands risk and they're incentivized to not just build and grow, but also hear the risk behind it and understand how risk can actually lead to lack of growth, that made a huge difference in how my reporting structure works. So naturally, reporting to the general counsel and CFO, that translates to risk management quite often. So it was a very easy conversation and fit for me, regardless of the technical depth. Even though CIOs and CTOs tend to have way more degree of technical depth, that risk conversation sometimes goes a little bit more difficult. And they're often not invited to the audit committee or the boardroom historically. And so it's a new area for them as well, as we're continually invited as CISO.
Those are very good insights, Manju. Greetings to our listeners. Welcome to the 10th installment of the TCSC podcast. I'm your host, Scott Brammer, and we are joined by our illustrious president, Brian Greene. Today, we're answering the question, who should the CISO report to? I know we will be successful in exploring this because of our special guests, who have both made an impact on the industry already. The role of the CISO has expanded and evolved significantly over the years. It is a linchpin in safeguarding organizations' digital assets. But the reporting structure, who the CISO reports to, can have profound implications on their effectiveness and the overall security strategy. In this episode, we're going to unpack the various reporting structures. We'll examine pros and cons of each. Should the CISO report to the CEO, the CIO, or perhaps directly to the board? Each option comes with its own sets of challenges and benefits. Let's take a moment to examine how reporting the CEO can elevate the importance of cybersecurity. It can give the CISO visibility and get them to that highest level where they can get the attention and the resources that they need. But on the flip side, this structure could lead to conflicts with other C-level executives. Literally, by reporting, and this may seem counterintuitive, but by reporting to the CEO, a CISO could find themselves partially isolated. The point is there's a lot to consider. As another possible diminishment to the office of the CISO, if you are reporting to your CEO and that CEO is preoccupied with other aspects of the business, perhaps business development, sales, other types of leadership, the tone and the expectations that the CEO is giving to the organization may deeply influence what attention you are able to capture. A lot to consider. So there's a lot of dynamics at play for the CISO, and balancing all of these dynamics is no small feat. The right reporting structure can depend on various factors: culture, risk tolerance, the maturity of the technology programs and the cybersecurity programs. Together, the four of us will actually take a look at 9 factors that can influence where the CISO should report. Whether you're a seasoned CISO or an aspiring cyber leader, or simply interested in the intricacies of cyber governance, this episode is for you. Who should the CISO report to? We'll start by looking at some statistics. We'll take a look at the state of the CISO today and see where CISOs are actually reporting. We will ground ourselves in reality. We will also take a blast into the past and see where the first CISO that was ever on the planet, where did they report and why? Then we'll get to those 9 factors that I was talking about and determine where a CISO should report. And finally, we will look at some of the pros and cons together. The most important thing is that we're getting the excellent expert consultation from Hinton Manju Mude. Before we move further, I want to immediately give the baton to Heather and to Manju. I suspect that both of you have very informed opinions on the CISO reporting structures. So before we go to statistics or factors or pros and cons, I want to give you the floor. What is your elevator pitch? And I'll even present a hypothetical scenario. Let's say you're advising a medium-sized company that's going to be hiring their second CISO. What's your top-line advice to them on where they should have the CISO report? So opening arguments. Let's come to Heather first, please.
So I'm going to counter with, it's going to depend on what kind of company you're talking about. But if you're in technology, so you are building something and you are acting as a vendor in somebody else's supply chain, it has to be chief product officer, chief technology, chief engineer. You've got to be as close to the action as possible because you are building stuff that is critical to other people's security as well as your own. And you have to be as close as you can possibly get. If that's not possible, I am going to echo what Manju said about positive relationships and chief legal officer, general counsel, whatever they're called, because that is the person that understands and often owns a lot of the risk in the company. And at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is implement the security programs and practices, policies, procedures, you name it, that are in place to protect our companies, protect their employees, protect their data and their customers' data. And it's all about balancing risk. And so you need to be close to the action to either the people that are essentially creating the risk because they're making a product or are able to argue how the risk fits into the context of the broader business. And I find that legal and security are very, very closely aligned in that goal. And so having those two teams partner in order to drive your security posture, drive your spend, your risk posture, your projects, the timelines is critical for success.
Wow. Full and complete answer as expected from Heather. Manju, I will come over to you. Again, the question is, what's your opening argument, your top-line advice for where a CISO should report? You can certainly use that hypothetical scenario if you would like.
I think it's important to ask questions before we advise on what we're supposed to do, because that is what we're supposed to do as CISOs. I agree with Heather. I have already said that I've had some very successful relationships reporting to general counsel. But what if in a medium-sized company, what if we did a rotation? What if we reported to the CEO initially for the first 6 to 12 months, and then we reported to general counsel or chief risk officer later on in our tenure, or someone else, depending on the type of company? I really think you have to think about the type of company, the stage of the company, the supply chain impact, the consumer impact, all of those different risks and cyber risks. And that really determines where the CISO should report. The vertical also matters. We keep using the term chief risk officer. The chief risk officer means something different in banking and pharma because they consider those risks, lending risks and banking risks, or the pharma risks, much bigger than the cyber risks, as those are all different types of risks, right? So I just want to be careful when we're saying chief risk officer that we don't put a tech lens on it because it means something else in different industries. I will say when a CEO and a CEO have a very close relationship or a direct reporting structure, that really sets the foundation of how important cyber is for that company and how seriously they take it for their consumers and investors. In medium companies or large scale companies, especially in public companies, you really don't want to wait until after there's an incident for that reporting structure to change. And too often that happens. And even when it doesn't officially happen, you see that in those cases, the CEO and the CISO are meeting daily in those cases anyways. So then they should have had that really tight relationship. But I just like that novel idea of what if the CISO was a little bit of a rotational structure and we didn't pin them down in any one place? There's also another angle we're not discussing, which is cybersecurity is not just an IT issue. And traditionally, you've seen that we've been tagged with CIO or CTO. That nomenclature, that brand is changing for us, and we have to do a better job of changing that brand. Part of why we're coupled with that brand is that we've done a really good job of saying that we're technologists and saying that we're ex-auditors and all of those things. But we haven't done unanimously a great job of saying we're business first, business growth, business enablers, beyond just a technology angle. So we're working on that collectively, I think, as CISOs, and we're changing our brand.
I would like to come to our president. You've just heard from two of the most informed CISOs that we know. Incredible opening arguments. What are you hearing?
Yeah, so I've been interacting with a lot of Fortune 500 and publicly traded companies lately. And this is not a comment about who the CISO should report to. This is just to back up a trend that I've been seeing and hearing. And that's that, to confirm what both Heather and Manju said, security and privacy are like this now inside of those big companies. And privacy often is a function that's underneath legal. So you're seeing this big move for security and legal to really work hand in hand as we move through time, because in large part, the SEC is changing regulatory environment all the time.
So let's take a look at where do CISOs report today. I'm going to bring us to two surveys. The first one is the Heidrick and Struggles Global Chief Information Security Officer Survey. This is from 2023. It was just released in March of 2024. They surveyed 260 CISOs and asked, who do you report to? I'd like to offer a quick disclaimer before I put the numbers up on the screen. Without direct evidence to offer, I feel that the survey is a little bit weighted to larger organizations. Heidrick and Struggles tends to do executive placements at the larger firms, and I think the 260 CISOs that they are asking as respondents in this survey are some of the higher level CISOs. So things are swayed to the heavier weight in my perception. That may impact the survey, but still the information here is very credible. So let's take a look at it. In the United States, and I will say this in descending order, 36% of CISOs report to the CIO, 18% report to the CTO, 12% to the Chief Operating Officer or Chief Administration Officer, 8% report to another CISO, perhaps a global CISO, 7% to Chief Risk, 3% to a General Counsel, 3% to a CEO, 7% to some role that I haven't mentioned here. So you can see the breakdown. CIO and CTO being heavily focused on technology, and then a lot of other business relationships. There's another item on the slide right here, and that's seniority, which is asking how many levels down from the CEO does the CISO occur? The results for all of the respondents worldwide, not just in the US, are 6% of CISOs report to the CEO, 66% or 2/3 report one level down from the CEO, 20% report 2 levels down, and 8% may report 3 or 4 levels down. So to Heather and to Manju, and Heather, I'll come to you first. What do you see in these numbers? And do you think looking at these is a good reality check before we get into factors and pros and cons? What do you think, Heather?
To whom you report is interesting, but I think that those are trends that are pretty consistent, and it's kind of, we've seen that data before. The piece to me that is far more interesting is the seniority, and that the 2/3 are one level below the CEO. I would argue that that is the right place to be because, if you think about it from a skip level, you get to do a skip level with a CEO. You have access to the CEO, relatively easy access to the CEO, right? Whoever you are reporting to will broker that for you if and when needed, if you can't. But it also means that you are not actually going to be subject to, I think what you were talking about is CEO distraction, right? The CEO is focused on running the business, and we are just one part of running that business. We need to make sure that when we are going to the CEO, right, we're going with running the business concerns, not weekly concerns or monthly concerns. There's just a difference in what you're going to be bringing to the CEO. The CEO doesn't have time for a lot of stuff. So I think that one level below is really important, and that's a trend that we want to encourage. I think that those direct to the CEOs, those are probably small companies, right, where, it's you all go out for lunch and it's the entire company and you're still at a table for 8 or less people. The 3 or 4 levels below the CEO, that one's a little bit concerning to me. I would really like to learn more about where that is. I suspect that that is in a very large company, and those are just not typical. And so I'm going to put those aside for now.
Manju, let's go to you with the same question. What are you seeing in these numbers? How do you reflect?
I'm actually not surprised by these numbers. I've worked in large public companies for the majority of my career, and I think it pretty much aligns with the sentiment of the large Fortune 500 companies. I have seen it very, very much partnered with the CIO and CTO quite often. I had a CEO say to me once, "We put you under the CIO because we just thought you were much more technical, and the last person in the role really wanted to talk about technology things that I couldn't help them with." And that's where I go back to that sentiment about what is our brand? What are we conveying? Are we conveying the business depth and the long-term strategies, or are we just conveying the technology angles and our technology specialties? If we, over time, change that brand, that we are business enablers in business growth, foundational leaders, we will also be changing our reporting structures. In our current state, because a lot of us grew up in tech or as developers or engineers in some way, it doesn't surprise me because we're speaking those things, right? We're talking the talk to CIOs and CTOs, but we really do have to shift that angle, and I think that will change over time. I will say that, after a company suffer breaches, they really rethink where the CISO should report. And really, what's not being said on this slide is you're still talking to the board, right? And regardless of any of this reporting structure, if you have time with the board, you're probably talking to the chief risk officer, general counsel, and CEO anyways, regardless. So there you go. This reporting structure doesn't necessarily mean your internal brand in the company.
I think Manju was spot on with what's not in here and what should be in here. And it's part of that to whom do you report conversation is, do you report to the board? Do you report to the audit committee? How often? How much time do you get? Are you at board strategy day or are you only at quarterly audit committee? I think those are really important conversations that have to be had, maybe not here, but they are critical to elevating both our brand and being appropriate stewards of our cybersecurity posture and the risks that come with that that the board really has to be paying attention to.
I may make an assumption, but if you have that access to the board, frequent versus quarterly, does it really matter who you report to?
Excellent question. I would hope not, right? And it gets to, reporting versus partnering.
Manju, I have a question for you. A couple of times Heather has brought up reporting versus partnering, and we want to not regard the reporting structure as a limitation or constraint. We want to make sure we are engaging with everyone. My question to you, Manju, is in a dynamic situation like a large breach recovery, how much of the reporting structure gets dynamically changed?
Almost all of it, especially if it's following the model that's depicted here. Really, you're spending the most time with the CEO, external counsel, actually not even internal counsel at that time, partnering with internal counsel and with PR. You are having frequent meetings with the board and specifically the angle of investor relations and regulatory communications.
And if you are in a tech, you are talking to the customers. So that relationship, that partnership with sales is critical because you are going in front of all of your top tier customers to explain what happened, reassure them, reestablish trust, and make sure that the customers are confident that we are doing everything that we need to do to respond and recover.
Heather and I have had some great conversations about the differences in a tech company or a software company versus a consumer company and what it takes to handle incidents or breaches in those types of companies. So there are definitely variations in B2B, B2C, highly consumer companies, software supply chain companies. So your responses kind of change based on that. But back to your question, Scott, reporting structures don't mean anything in the middle of a publicly disclosed issue. Even whether it's a cyber issue or another type of issue, they mean nothing because you are now at the mercy of PR and recovery. So it really doesn't matter. Back to what Heather said, that's just your internal HR record at that point.
Can I make a sports analogy? It feels to me like breach happens. CISO reports to CIO or CTO. Doesn't know the CEO very well. That'd be like taking two people that don't play tennis together and putting them in a doubles final.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's why that partnership and that relationship is so important.
We're going to take a look at one more survey together. And this survey is from IONS. This is their 2022 survey. They surveyed over 500 people that are head of security or higher. For those that don't know, IONS is like a cybersecurity consultancy, part think tank. They come out of Boston. They do very good work. They have similar findings to the evidence we just saw from Heidrick and Struggles. But there are a couple of takeaways. One, 10% more CISOs are reporting to the technology leaders than in the other survey. So there's a slightly higher contingent of people reporting to the CIO and CTO than we just saw in the other survey, which again, I think was largely influenced by larger organizations. The other thing that's a little bit different, just subtly different, is the amount of CISOs reporting to the CEO actually goes up quite a bit, like 3 times. Now we're up to maybe 9% of CISOs reporting to a CEO. So these are slight differences, but this insistence on being coupled with technology is definitely still there. The IONS report also does the seniority element, and we're looking at percentages that are VP or director or they're actually C-level leaders. And what they're getting to here is not everybody is reporting to the CEO. Not everybody is even a direct report to a direct report of the CEO. There's definitely variation. So I think that this aligns smoothly to what we just observed with that slight difference more towards technology. I'd like to get us to a new topic. Let's go to the origin of the role of the CISO. What was the original vision? The office of the CISO has been with us for about 30 years. Steve Katz was the first Chief Information Security Officer. He was appointed to the role by Citicorp in 1995, and he reported to the Chief Information Officer. Katz was a cybersecurity leader who helped teach all of us how to be transparent after a breach, do general breach cleanup. He was hired to help Citicorp respond to and clean up after a breach they had with Russian hacking activity. Steve started a few trends in his first weeks and months on the job. He reported to the CIO. He helped with breach cleanup. And because he was involved with a breach from day one, or actually even before he became and was announced as the CISO, there's that empowerment and career liability in the wake of a security event. And like Manju said, everything changes as soon as you are in some sort of a breach or incident condition. So in lots of ways, we as CISOs are still in the shadow of Steve. So I'd like to come back to our special guests. Heather, I'll come to you first. What parts of Steve Katz and his original experience as a CISO resonates with you even to this day?
So first of all, right, Katz was one of the greats, and we all owe him just incredible debt of thanks and gratitude for setting up the CISO role and helping us as, I'm a technologist, I'm an engineer by training, those are my peeps. And Katz was a technologist as well. And what Katz kind of did was he helped us all understand and learn how to have the conversations about risk. And he helped us come to terms, something that many of us have to do every day, with the fact that we are not going to have perfect security. We're not going to be able to put every program in place. We're not going to be able to do everything we want. And the business has looked at the risk and said it's okay. And so as part of up-leveling our brand that Manju has been talking about, one of the things that we have to be able to do is be unemotional, factual, speak business language about the risks that the company is assuming, and making sure that everybody understands the impact of these risks, and then allowing the business to make a properly informed business decision on how quickly they're going to address that risk, whether they're going to accept it or whether they're going to move on. And I think that risk thinking kind of disappeared for a little while. Katz had it. He talked about, and there's a quote that I dug up, right? The role is all about business risk, he said. If I had my way, the modern title would be Chief Information Risk Officer rather than Chief Information Security Officer. Cybersecurity is a tool for managing business risk. It is not an end in itself. And I think that that's the gift that keeps on giving from Katz, is that it's pointing us in the direction of where we need to go as we up-level our brand and as we continue to have a more business-focused approach to cybersecurity.
Heather, could we have you on every podcast? You are awesome. Manju, the Steve Katz experience, what resonates for you?
I want to say Heather is awesome. Absolutely is.
We're all awesome. Everybody is awesome.
The Steve Katz experience, I echo what Heather said. He's the godfather of the land of CISOs. So deeply appreciative to Steve. That being said, we have an opportunity to evolve. There's some foundational work that he did that we still use and very much need today. But the evolution, the role has evolved. Technology has evolved. Breaches have evolved. Funny enough, CVEs have not evolved.
Oh, they just keep coming.
Right. The same mistakes and hygiene errors have not evolved, but there's a lot of things that have evolved. And because of that evolution in companies, the way businesses are much more present and involved in cyber reputations, trust reputations, and all of that, the role of the CISO needs to, right? And so that means reporting structures, that means budgets, that means time with the board, all of those things that we already discussed. I don't think that my experience is that different from Steve's. I've been a CISO for, or some capacity of cyber leader for over a decade, and in cyber for 25 years. And I've seen that evolution. I just think we're on to the next phase because ever since the FTC and SEC and all of these regulatory bodies have really been throwing things at us, we need to change and we need to evolve.
We are continuing to explore who should the CISO report to. And we are treating this like it is the most important question. Who should the CISO report to? But there's so much more in the who, what, when, where, why, and how. What should the CISO report? When should the CISO report? Where should the CISO report? Why should the CISO report? How should the CISO report? And I hope that all of our listeners right now are hearing Heather and Manju, and they're seeing that there's some reverse engineering happening here. By answering all of these other questions, the who kind of just reveals itself. And I think there's a theme in all of our discussions. It's coming back to partnering. We've got to partner with everybody. All right, we are to the factors. What matters for a CISO reporting relationship? We've already illuminated this in all of our discussions, but now let's go ahead and get discrete. We're going to go through 9 factors, and we'll have a bit of a discussion about them. I'm going to briefly introduce a few that are on the screen, and then we will get into some further discussion. So the first factor that we are talking about is organizational history and culture. You can have traditional or progressive structures. Some people even enjoy innovation officers or impact officers in their company. There can be lots of different shapes and colors for organizations. But what are the opportunities, or what's the tolerated behavior? What's the CEO or founder's preference? What's the board of directors' preference for where the CISO should report? There's also independence and objectivity. Does the organization want a CISO to have oversight and actually regulate the work of other teams? Or is the CISO intended to be a functionary or facilitator that enables other teams? That nuance can definitely impact where a CISO reports. The CISO is driving security assessments. How deeply are they allowed to investigate or encouraged to investigate? How independent is the third line of risk defense allowed to be? Can the CISO push forward policy, or does the organization get passive-aggressive if you push too far? So in terms of the independence and objectivity, you could really think of it as how far can you go with security assessments? How far can you go with policy? How far can you go with governance or contending with shadow IT? And how much control and operational control does the organization want the CISO to have for incident management and escalations? So if we stop right there, organizational history and culture, independence and objectivity, put a lot on the plate, but I'd like to ask Heather and Manju to shine a light.
I think, this is a nice list. I agree with most of the topics. I might tweak them a little differently. It actually depends on the evolution of a company. At an early stage startup, I wouldn't say that all of these things matter at the same scale. Later on, as the company matures, it changes. In fact, I would say in an early stage startup, you shouldn't have a CISO. You should have some cyber advice, maybe a fractional CISO, cyber consulting, whatever else you need, but you don't need a full-time CISO. That being said, the focus there would be on products and culture and all of those things. I don't think at an early stage you would really need independence and objectivity either. Speed is of the utmost value at that stage. I think risk management is prominent throughout the life cycle, but the foundation of any company is culture. It's the foundation of what you're setting your security priorities to be. How important is security in a company, whether you're a 20-person company or 200,000-person company? Setting that from the top is really, really important. That, if you talk about the governance behind that and coupling that with, where the CEO reports and also the board reporting and all of that, those relationships and partnerships internally, that's foundational to every single company, regardless of size. The other things are dependent on vertical size and everything.
So here's what I find really interesting about these factors. To me, these are not saying, to whom should I report? These are providing me clues on what should I report and when and how, right? And it gets back to it's go back and think about when you were a first line manager. What was your job in terms of the people that reported to you, right? It was to make sure that they were doing their day-to-day work, and it was all of that sort of stuff. But if you were one of the ones that I consider to be the greats, you were also focused on things like career growth for your people, helping them with opportunities, mentoring them. You looked after their pay and their bonuses and whatever, but you were their advocate for them as an individual. And I think that translates up to what a CISO needs, right? A CISO needs whoever it is that they're reporting to be helping them with that career growth, with that advocacy, with those opportunities. And then that the CISO themselves is partnering with everybody. And then with some people, I might be reporting on and giving them status on security assessments. For other people, I might be focused on governance and shadow IT. That might be the focus of my conversations with the CIO. Whereas with the sales team, I might really be focused on security assessments. And when I'm talking to legal, risk management might be, all we talk about. And so these factors to me speak more about the conversations that I need to have with the different stakeholders in a company. And that gets back to how I partner with them. I'm speaking the right language. I'm meeting them where they are. I'm speaking to the salesperson about sales, about opportunities, about, opportunity to cash, on time to close, on committed pipelines, right? I'm talking to them in their language. When I'm talking to procurement, I'm talking about all of the pieces that procurement is concerned about, financial risk of a potential vendor, as well as, the security risk, the privacy risk. Again, I'm meeting them where they are and having that conversation with them where they are. So to me, these factors are not factors in to whom I report. They are factors in the conversations that I have with all of the individual stakeholders in the company.
I didn't see reflected in the material is the people management, the leadership, the influence. We are, in the end, influencers and people managers and intended to be strong leaders. And I think that is a piece that this framework.
That's a great call out, Manju. Being able to build a high-functioning, high-performing team is probably the most important thing. Otherwise, we are going to just implode at trying to do everything ourselves. We have to be able to build those teams. And Manju's right. That's not in here.
That partnership, that we keep talking about, that partnership means in our world today, we call them influencers, right? So that's that influencer. Are you a good influencer? Are you a good spreader of the message internally? And do you have other champions besides the people who are paid to think about security, right? And so that's the goal of a CISO, is how many people care about security and not have to have it as their primary job, right? That's what you want.
I like that. I'm keen on saying that a CISO is a business and culture leader first and a cyber leader second. And I think that echoes what you're trying to communicate. You have to be able to build teams. You have to be able to influence stakeholders. And you need to find the empowerment and the authorization to do those things. Else you got to build it yourself. I do want to point out to anybody that's listening on the podcast and they're not seeing the YouTube channel, Heather and Manju have also been responding to risk management strategy and business impact as factors.
Yes.
If we look at some other factors here, regulatory requirements. What is the CISO's involvement in accountability or disclosure processes? Is this new world of liability and materiality important in choosing who you report to? Privacy keeps growing every day. And then I want to call out the direct interactions with regulators that are below the surface of disclosures and incidents. You may be talking to your regulators every day, going over some theory and some investigations. That still is relevant to where the CISO is reporting. You're not in the territory of breach disclosures, but you're still interacting with law enforcement and external parties. There's the size and complexity of the organization to consider. the size and scope of your security team, your digital assets, your information assets, your third-party risk. All of this should influence who the CISO is reporting to. But there's also industry practice and the threat landscape. This kind of goes together. Industry practice, we're asking ourselves questions about what frameworks are we using, what compliance do we need to achieve. What's the relative comparison to peers and competitors? In many cases, the definition of due care and due diligence is set by an entire industry. Does everybody in this industry have a CISO? Does everybody in this industry have a 5-person, a 10-person, or a 100-person security team? That can help refine what the scope of your work is. Coupling all of that with the threat landscape, some areas require a lot more security efficacy than others. Some places are targeted more than other industries, though that is always changing. At this point, I would say everybody is being targeted all the time. But here's a few more factors to consider. So I'd like to go to Manju for some insights. When you see these, are you still thinking this is the when, what, why, and how? Or are there some helpful things in here for considering on the CISO reporting structure?
A little bit of both, Scott. Sorry to be teetering in the middle, but again, it really depends on the size of the company and the maturity of the company and what they're trying to solve at the time. I do think that, if I were to use this list, it would be much more what I'm reporting. A few pieces of these things. I'd break it down differently based on the type of organization. In banking, I would focus heavily on regulatory and industry and things like that. But it really depends on the size of the company and the vertical. I think contextually, most of these make sense, and they really do align to the what a CISO's report. Heather?
Yeah, I agree. And actually, I think I would almost turn the question around, Scott. You're asking to whom should you report? And what I think, again, it's all partnership, right? You've got to partner with everybody. I think we've, made that point enough that we're going to accept that. But I think that maybe if we think about it in terms of who should you not be reporting to, and I don't want to necessarily go down that path, but what I do want to say is if it turns out that you are not necessarily reporting to somebody who is the right person to help you with your relationships, these factors here help you figure out how you then go about and establishing the partnerships that you need and how to get your reporting person, the CEO, I don't know, let's say for some reason you're reporting to the head of HR. It's a really tiny company. They didn't know where to put you. You ended up with the head of HR, right? I don't know any CISOs that report to the head of HR. It would be, in my opinion, a little bit odd, but let's pretend you are. I would use this list to work with my manager to say, here are the relationships that I need to have in place because this is what I need. I need to be able to talk to legal about this. I need to be able to talk to, and all of those ones that I, talked about in my last answer. So I would use this as a cheat sheet to how to get my manager, how to enlist them to help me build the relationships that I need in the rest of the company.
Our last and final trait on this list is really looking at the traits of the person you are reporting to on an interpersonal relationship level. Can the person advocate for you? Are they interested? Do they have an attitude where they want to support security? Do they have availability? Do they actually have time to interact with you? It may be that, for example, the chief technology officer already has 8 or 9 direct reports, and they don't have the time or the energy to be able to pull a CISO into their orbit. Perhaps you need to rectify that before everything else begins. Competence and readiness. We've talked about yielding to the person you work with, meeting them where they are, having the risk language that they need. But conversely, whoever you're reporting to does have to have some cybersecurity rudiments in there somewhere. There's an element of return on investment that can be ambiguous, especially in security. Often in security, we're dealing with the value of a negative. The breach didn't happen. the security incident didn't occur. Whoever you're reporting to has to understand that there's still value there. They need to know that security awareness is appropriate in many situations. They need to be ready to work with you on the rules of engagement when an incident does occur, following those incident response plans and communication plans. And then, of course, your leadership styles and personalities just have to gel. No matter where you're looking across the reporting structure, from CEO to general counsel, there has to be fit. That cultural element has to be there. I think we've talked about this a lot. Just by putting all of these items on the slide in front of us. Heather or Manju, any thoughts to lighten the load here?
Okay, I'm going to jump in. I love all the top level bullets. I really disagree with the little lowercase things that are in some of them. I'd say that advocacy and leadership style are probably the two most important for me. Interest, attitude, I don't care if they care about cybersecurity before I came, because it's my job to make sure that they care enough about what we're trying to do and the goals that we have and how cybersecurity enables the business. They absolutely have to be available to help me. They should not have a role necessarily in a cyber event other than blocking and tackling for me. I will bring in experts for that. That's why we have retainers with lawyers and PR firms and forensics firms, because we bring in the experts to help us with that. I think that the liability one is really interesting, and we probably don't want to go down that path. But I think that they are not going to accept the legal jeopardy that cyber entails, right? That's why the CISO is in that role. So we'll push that one aside and just say we're not going to touch it because it is such a can of worms right now. So, but I'd like to hear what Manju has to say, because I think that we probably actually have different opinions on this one.
Actually, I'll agree with the first part of your statement, Heather. For me, leadership style and advocacy are absolutely number one. But my observation there is it's regardless of whether you're a CISO or not. I mean, advocacy and leadership style are consistent things for any employee with a manager, right? At any stage of your career, do you feel like you have an advocate? I think at the CISO stage, it's especially important. I've definitely felt a difference when I've come into an organization with an advocate and without an advocate, or an advocate has left the organization. So I personally felt that difference. I do think there's a little bit of things around liability, but I'll twist that a little bit. I think it's around more ethics and integrity. As CISOs, that is the foundation of what we do. It's ethics and integrity, and we're very aware of that. I don't know that always translates to our reporting structures, meaning do they care as much about the ethics of we're doing what we're doing as we do? Our job is to build trust and accountability, right? And that is what we need to do, is to build that trust and accountability with internal, external customers, stakeholders, all of us. And that means that we need to use that in our reporting chains as well. Do they understand that there's a sense of accountability that they have? This is not just the problem of the people that get paid to think about security. This is everyone's problem. And foundationally, the what ifs could be real. At the same time, we have to balance the FUD. We have to balance the naysayer attitude. We have to balance the optimism. So we really have to frame this in growth opportunity and things that could hinder growth, rather than preaching idealisms and sky is falling type mentality. And once we get better at that, we'll be able to spread that accountability, that shared accountability that everybody's responsible for security. That is, I think, what the crux of it is. Also, the second part is all of these things are foundationally built on business acumen. Does the person you're reporting to really have business acumen? If they're exclusively, someone who only cares about uptime and only cares about speed of build, they might not think about the full-rounded business acumen. And you, as a CISO, have to think about those things.
Couple other things to take a look at. The pros and cons. I'll present some tables and charts listing pros and cons for reporting to some of the common reporting structures. We'll take a look. Maybe we have some great insights. So first, looking at reporting to the CEO, the CIO, or the CTO. Some pros and cons are listed. For example, if you're reporting to the CEO, you may be able to operate with some levels of independence. You may get great visibility into the organization. You may be able to achieve fantastic strategic alignment with the CEO. On the con side, with working with the CEO, you might experience some isolation. You might be finding yourself in direct competition with other C-level leaders. There could be some dramatic deprioritization if the CEO needs to pivot, or they're simply focused or preoccupied with other areas. There could also be an element of stakeholder disengagement. There may be people that are shy or reluctant about engaging with you because you are a direct report to the CEO. Security in general already can have some challenges with disengagement, but if you're reporting to the CEO, now you also allegedly have a hammer as well. If you're looking at the CIO role, this can be absolutely brilliant because you can get the integration that you need with the technology side of the business and some of the important technology-focused teams. There's access to resources to make technology changes. On the con side, potential conflicts of interest can arrive. There could be reduced independence, perhaps if the CIO holds you a little bit at arm's length. And again, there's that deprioritization element. CTO is very, very similar. Again, this is very technology-focused, delivering the technology needs of the business. The one thing that I added in here for the CTO was they might really be able to help you with incident response. Again, these are just conversation starters. This is not a rigid list, but it's just some idea generators. So to Heather and Manju, what do you see?
This is a really good breakdown of the pros and cons. I'm sure there's more pros and cons that we didn't discuss quite yet. I actually agree with most of them. I also think that it depends on the seniority of the CISO. Someone who's as tenured as Heather or myself, or who's been in the field for 20 or 30 years, I think would be fine without that daily handholding. If this is your first time CISO job and you're earlier in your tenure as a CISO, or you've been in cyber for less than 10 or 15 years, you might actually need a couple layers in, or the CIO or CTO might make sense for you. It depends. Some of the cons that were mentioned around, well, you don't get direct FaceTime with the CEO. Maybe you don't need that because you kind of know the ropes. So I think it really depends on what you need also as a leader, how big the company is, and all of that. Heather?
Yeah, I think that these pros and cons are just pros and cons of the CISO. They are things that the CISO has to be aware of and has to be paying attention to regardless of who you report to, right? There is always, no matter where you report, the threat that security is going to be deprioritized, especially if there is a history of security being the Department of No. People just don't want to deal with that negative, right? You've got to turn it into the Department of Yes and. There's always going to be a perception of a conflict of interest because people are going to look at you and they are going to say your job is security, which it is, right? And so people will always turn that into, well, your job isn't to ship a product. No, my job is to ship a secure product. My job is to make sure that we are selling a secure product. So the conflict of interest is real. So all of these pros and cons are things that we have to be able to influence, and are why I'm going to go back, partnership, why partnership is so critical, because we turn all of these things into characteristics of what we are trying to achieve. We are advocating for resources because we are working to enable the business in this particular way. And I get rid of the conflict of interest because I get on a shared mission. I am working with the sales team to make sure that we are selling a secure product, or that, something goes wrong, we are addressing it immediately. We are listening to the customer. We are maintaining that customer trust, right? I make sure that I have done a good enough job advocating for the security projects so that they aren't deprioritized. And if they are deprioritized, I am being thoughtful and calm and not the chicken little, the sky is falling, in terms of working with the business to understand the impact of that deprioritization and how do we recover? What do we do instead? So, again, to me, these are all things that are, if I was advising somebody who was young in their career, to get back to what Manju was talking about, these are all things that I would say, here are things that you've got to be able to address. You've got to be aware of when they're happening, and you've got to develop the skills to be able to, prevent these cons, leverage these pros, and use this to become successful at making security be something that is truly protecting and enabling the business.
That is where we should end, because that is a definitive statement. I am deeply grateful to Heather Hinton and to Manju Mude. You are both accomplished and experienced CISOs, and it has shown in your analysis today. I didn't have to ask questions because you were anticipating them. So that's just hats off to both of you for being direct and straight to the point. We always want to support you here at the Cybersecurity Council. If there's anything we can ever do for either of you, we would like to do that. Brian?
Let me say, you already know this. You're two of my favorite people that interact with TCSC. So thank you for being willing to join us here, join our events. I had an old football coach that used to say, time is our most precious commodity. So thank you both for giving us some of your time.
Thank you so much for facilitating a really interesting conversation.
Thank you, Scott. And thank you, Brian. Really appreciate this. And I love what the Cybersecurity Council is doing.
Welcome to the Cybersecurity Council. This council strives to showcase unique cybersecurity leadership stories. Its mission is to demystify and simplify cybersecurity across the entire business landscape. Best practices, lessons learned, operational recommendations, it's all here.
Assemble the council.